that made me feel like I was on the bottom, and that there was no one around to help me. Not even family. They just stood right back and said, well, this man should pull himself up by his own bootstraps. They didn't realize that there were all these forces in the world that were trying to keep me down that way, that the United Church did not want that PhD produced, that the RCMP did not want that tribunal done, and they
but the
tried
more
to
they
stop
tried,
it.
what did that do to you? The more they tried.
I got angry at them. I said, why? What the hell right do they have to do that to me? What the hell have I done wrong? Nothing. I said...
Did you lose your faith in
no,
the
here's the wrong I did. The wrong I did was I expected the church to live by its principles. That was my wrong.
What were its principles?
It claimed to be following in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. You know, to seek, you know, they have this great statement in the United Church to walk humbly and seek justice, you know, in the world. Well, I just expected them to do that. That's what it said on paper. I just asked them to live by their principles when it had to do with land they had stolen from the native people and children that they had hurt and murdered in their residential school. I simply said, do what's right. And I was told time and again that it was wrong for me to have done that.
You knew that it happened before. You were well read.
Yeah.
You realized that the last 200 years, 2,000 years that happened.
Yeah, but I was complicit in it. I was part of the culture that did it, and I was blind to it. You know, raised in that condition of affluence, I had an idea. I remember thinking when I was in my 20s, oh yeah, native people, yeah, they've been put down. I had kind of a vague idea that they were on the outs and they had been attacked and murdered en masse and all that, but it didn't enter my life at all. I mean, it didn't really... The only contact I'd ever had with native people was when I was 15. We went up to a village in northern BC on an exchange, and we lived for 10 days among Aboriginal kids up there, and then they came down into our community and hung out with us. But what I saw just blew my mind in that little community of Hazelton in northern BC. Just unbelievable. I didn't think people lived like that in Canada. You know?
Lived worse than you did.
Well, I mean, yeah, even the poorest white person, they didn't come anywhere near the experience of what was going on in that village. Kids running around, I mean, not just literally without clothes and dying from malnutrition, but I mean, you know, there'd be like, there was a little 6-year-old girl whose dad had gone after with an axe. You know, she was carrying a mark around on her head because her dad had whacked at her while she was drunk. And that was just accepted. Like, I mean, oh yeah, well... It wasn't considered there was anything wrong with that. And I thought, well, these people, I think I was scared by that. I thought, you know, and so when I got older, I thought, well, native people are kind of an oddity. I don't really want to understand them too much. I mean, that was all going on to me. But then I realized I had to. The more I began to work with them, I had to understand.
And what did you come to understand?
Well, it didn't come right away. It came over time.
What came?
What genocide really looks like, up close. What it means to be at the receiving end of a campaign to exterminate you. What it means to be the survivors of mass murder. You go around with, you feel like you're going to die at any moment. You're going to be tortured at any moment again. So all you have to do is hide. You got to hide.
You could identify with that?
Oh yeah.
I still have nightmares about snakes and all the kind of things that happened to me in school, and very difficult, you know. Sometimes I tried ending my life many times because I just couldn't stand the pain that I was going through.
He took each of us in there one by one, and he had us bend over, and he had Vaseline with him. He did that to each of us 3 times, I remember that. To satisfy himself. To enjoy himself on little kids. I forgot how old I was, either 6, 7, or 8. maybe 9, I forget. But I remember, I'll never forget Mr. Moore.
He said, "You know what, sis?" He says, "I can't wait to get out of this hellhole. I'm going to tell everything." And then the phone went dead. People at Cooper Island always listened to our phone calls and censored our letters back, coming in and going out. So I was afraid for him, but I didn't think it was going to be as bad as it was. It turned out as bad as it was. 2 days later, we got a phone call saying that he hung himself. He committed suicide. But I'd never, ever believed in my heart that he'd ever do that. They had them walk through the gym while Richard was still hanging and told them that it could happen to them.
My brother died because of a cattle prod, of a shock of a cattle prod. When he was 4 years old, they dragged him by the hair and they cut his skin right off his head. The pastors did that with a whip, like a horse whip. It was sharp, with these little blades on it. And when I was in there, I heard him scream for help. And right away, there was a lot of blood on the floor, and they wouldn't take him to a hospital or the nurse or nothing. What happened then? When I was in there, I heard him still scream for help. "Rick, help! They're torturing me. I'm gonna die." So he died right away, like that. He was my only best friend and my only brother that I always loved.
What would be the final solution for you? What would relieve your mind or give you
Well, when you're dealing with a crime this huge, there isn't any solution ultimately, because it's not as if something like this can be healed. It's like when you look at genocide being perpetrated on one group of people, it never stays confined to that one group. It always blows back on the people perpetrating it. And I often think about that when I look at what we're doing to the land and the environment. I mean, we destroyed people who had been living in harmony with the land for thousands, tens of thousands of years. And that can't help but affect us and the way that we live. But I think that something this huge, you can't just give an apology and a bit of money. It's an insult to people who have been sterilized and seen their friends murdered to think that that's going to solve anything. But what will begin to turn the tables on this is if the perpetrators are brought to justice and are able to say, yes, we did these crimes, yes, we did try to wipe you out. I often know, working with Native people who've been through these death camps called residential schools, for them, they never talk about money. They never talk about compensation. A lot of the Native politicians will talk about that. But the people on the ground, they keep saying over and over, I just want to face the people who did this to me. I want to tell them what I think about them, and I want them to admit what they did to me in front of the world.
I think if they did that, I would forgive them if they would just admit what they did to us is genocide.
And the government has never ever came up and acknowledged their mistake of a residential school. And to me that is totally wrong. And the churches are hiding behind the laws of man-made laws and not admitting their wrongs regarding residential school. And I feel that's cowardly.
They're thinking they figured they could get away with it?
Oh yeah, of course.
Why
they
did
could
they
get
figure
away
they
with
could
it.
get away with
Because they were the law. The church and the government were and still are the law. Churches are exempt from prosecution for these things, clearly. For almost 10 years, the knowledge of these things have been out in the press. The courts have refused to prosecute the churches over these crimes. Time and again, judges have said this issue of genocide is not going to be addressed in this court. They restricted it to issues like, well, the children suffered a loss in education, or they were hit sometimes, but they've refused systematically to address the issue of murder and genocide. We know that in just the residential schools, the official death rate given by the government themselves was 50%. And if they took they claim 100,000 children went through the schools, but that's conservative because they would often grab children in whole areas, not just the 7-year-olds and up, which they had to do under the law, but 3, 4, 5-year-old kids were common. in the residential schools. So if you double our number, you're probably talking 250,000 children went through the residential schools. Half of them who died, 100,000 children alone just in the residential schools. When you look at the whole history of the Indian reserves, and it's got to be in the millions.
If they want evidence, as a 7-year-old child, I witnessed myself the burial of a child, and I didn't know what was happening at that time. I was with another student, and I asked him, I said, "What's happening here? I see them digging a hole in the orchard," and they said they're burying another one.
In '65, there's a bunch of us kids playing soccer in the back field. There was a brush of leaves and grass piled up, and there was a body underneath it. One of the kids kicked the ball, and he went to get it. It was quite decomposed.
Went to Waterbury in 1960, and I found a dead body in 1967 in between Ross Hall and Colwell Hall. Native girl, she was about 16, and I told Jay Andrews, and Jay Andrews shipped me out of Waterbury, went to Nanaimo, and I believe it was a cover-up.
And we need those children returned home. They need to be brought back and given a proper burial. And that's really kind of a most basic first thing that the churches and government need to do. They need to identify where those bodies are.
And I remember we used to go dig graves there, and they would be kids that came from Charles Camsell Indian Hospital. How they died, I don't know. But I know we just dug a lot of graves.
There was a lot of Eskimo babies buried in that burial ground, which was behind the principal's house. Just on the other side of the staff garden. There was 4 of us that dug the grave. Myself, my brother Larry, Mel Patsy, and Albert Cardinal.
When my mom was younger, her and a friend were instructed to go throw away this thing that was wrapped in a newspaper, and they were told not to look into it, but they didn't listen. They unwrapped it, and it was a fetus.
One particular incident was where a nun sexually abused, sexually abused a young boy, and as a result, the nun became pregnant and gave birth to a baby, and after it gave birth to the baby, this was one incident that they killed the baby, and they had the young fella dig a grave for the baby. Another incident was a lady witnessed a nun in Cranbrook where they gave a baby and had her participate in drowning the baby in the bucket of water, you know. And now it's become a cornerstone of some building in Cranbrook.
I would say that one of the biggest things that we're asking for right now is that where are those children buried, and how can we get them home? Is there any difference between what happened with Nazi Germany and what's happened over here?
The key now is to get a lot of the stories and the documentation out into the mainstream through these kinds of documentaries, and just keeping the international pressure in Canada. I think, for example, organizing an international boycott of Canadian goods, maybe a boycott of the 2010 Olympics, something like that. That's the kind of thing that's going to bring international pressure on Canada. I think that's the only way this stuff is ever going to come out, because the contradiction here is that the very institutions that committed these crimes are still in power. They're all legitimate, they're protected by the law, the government, the churches, the RCMP. These are mainstream institutions, and they're not going to prosecute themselves over this. They're going to have to be brought to some kind of international court of justice.
Is there one human that could be responsible for that, could be taken to court?
Yeah, any of the the fiduciary officers of these organizations, the Prime Minister of Canada, the heads of the United Church, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the superintendent of the RCMP, they're all just as culpable under the Nuremberg laws. Those precedents that say heads of state are just as liable for the actions of murder as are the soldiers who pull the trigger. Well, it isn't just the people in the residential schools that are liable for this, but you know, these officials in the churches and government, which is probably why they put so much energy into denying this stuff, smearing and assassinating the character of people like me who are trying to bring out the truth about this, and intimidating Native eyewitnesses, using their own chiefs often to do that.
Who's going to listen? You know, who's going to stand up? You know, in the court case in this country of ours, you know, minimum we need is $80,000 to $800,000 to start a court case. And how many lawyers in this country of ours that's going to stand up and fight for our just rights? There ain't any. And how many Indian lawyers we got have yet seen one to step up to the plate to take the fight all the way? Oh, I hate doing this.
You hear a lot about money, you don't hear about the actual deaths of children, and this is the issue we want to bring out now that's being systematically buried by the government and churches of Canada. It's being buried by the court process, which is accompanied by a gag order. If you're a Native person and you go through the courts, one of the things that is imposed on you is a gag order, so that you can't actually talk about the terms of your settlement or your story. And yet being able to tell one's story is essential to one's healing. And to being able to turn the tables, if you like, of shame. It isn't Aboriginal people who should be carrying the shame anymore. It's we, the culture that did it, who have to start carrying that cross. Right on, right on. So one of the ways we can do that is simply by telling the truth and forcing the truth out of institutions like this one. They have to come out from behind their lawyers and their money and their power.
It's hard to not hear the voices, not hear the cries, not hear, like they're haunting. And I pray that those little spirits that are captured in here like that in pain, that they'd be released. I open that window on purpose, to be released out of here, you know.
We've lost thousands upon thousands of children through suicide, not natural death, suicide. We find them every day of the week. We find them down in the city of Vancouver. You know, the city of Vancouver is just a small part of what goes on across Canada and the United States, because we have a lot of our First Nations people dying on the streets of Seattle. Because before the Europeans landed, our people traveled back and forth, and so they had relatives down there. And so we had, like in Vancouver, for instance, you have between 45 to 60,000 Native people living in the city of Vancouver. And you're probably finding pretty close to 90% of them are dying on the streets, you know, of drug abuse, not alcohol, drug abuse. How do I know that? Because I sit on the board down there with the Native Liaison Society that's attached to the Vancouver City Police. And I asked the question one time, how many of our people die, or people die on the streets of Vancouver? I said, whatever you read in the paper, you can multiply that by 10 times. And just I think the year before last, you had 365 deaths, so you could figure that out. And that's a direct impact of residential school.
A friend of ours, Sylvia Yellowhorse from Alberta, she died because of alcohol poisoning. She drank so much. So I believe that she was one of the kids that was abused by one of the staff members, or a few of the staff members. Oh, this really hurts.
Many of our women, young women especially, are going missing because now, after the residential school abuse and everything is over, they're treating our young women like they're disposable. Nobody seems to care when they do go missing. As far as they're concerned, it's just another dead Indian.
Right now, in the downtown east side, Aboriginal people are the ones that are getting HIV, they're the ones that are getting hepatitis C. We're suffering the most from this, and we just got to stop it somehow. The only way we can stop it is by trying to get people to care, right?
If you had to do it all over again, Kevin, would you do it again?
Yes, absolutely, because I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I had have known these things and done what I was told, which was to keep quiet about it, because, you know, you're an accessory to a crime under the law if you do that, for one thing.
Why don't Canadians have courage, Kevin? Why don't Canadians speak out? Why don't they ask questions?
I don't know.
Why are things thrown at us that we just accept?
The native people on the coast even have a name for whites, the Mamachni, the ghost people, the ones without substance, you know. I didn't want to be a Mamachni anymore. I wanted to be a human being.
Why did they think of us as this, the natives? What did they see in us that we didn't see?
They saw what we had lost. I think of what we lost. You know, think of what happened in Europe. You know what happened in Europe over centuries. Same kind of trauma they went in here. The religious wars, the famines, the Black Death, the persecutions, the torture, the witch hunts, the mass murder of millions of people, throwing my ancestors off their land. All of the shit that happened here happened there. And so we're all trauma victims. You know, those of us who come over here, we not only haven't faced our trauma when we came here, but we had lost something.
Look what you've done to the First Nations people. You have killed their kids. You have abused their mind. You have abused their bodies. Physically and spiritually, you have abused us. Not only the land, you have raped the land. You have polluted the land. You have polluted the minds of the native people, the kids. You've raped the kids. You killed the kids.
You look at Indigenous people and say, well, why would we despoil our river? Why would we grab more land than we need? Why would there be poor people in our midst and rich people? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, no society can survive living like that, and yet it's the virtue in our society to operate like that. So we're crazy. I mean, we have become completely insane. And it comes out of that, you know, that terrible alliance that happened when you had this notion that a religion called Christendom was superior to all others and had to conquer the world, combined with the vested interest of a merchant class that wanted to conquer the world for its own profit, armed with this religion. Krishnamurti, who was a Hindu writer, he said a beautiful thing, and that's why I think, I don't believe in religions. I believe the spirit is shared by people all over. But he said, God hides himself in the most broken ones among us, and God hides himself in the most broken parts of ourselves. Hidden in there, but present, like a little seed. And I'd say that our worst experiences are a way to reveal that, and for us to find a new meaning and strength in our life. Because when you lose everything for the right reason, for a just cause, or for people who can't fight for themselves, when you stand with them and lose everything, you gain everything. You lose the false things in your life that we're so wedded to.
The only thing the church did to me, was say, I'm sorry, wrote a letter of apology. Some bitch thinks writing on paper and saying verbally to me, saying I'm sorry, doesn't work. It makes me more angrier to think they can give me a few dollars and that'll make me forget.
No, we're not all one happy family. There's this whole world, like every society for 5,000 years, has rests on the suffering and misery and exploitation of some group of people. And you're not going to find God up in a church somewhere. You're going to find God down there in the garbage heap with those people. That, to me, is the message of Christ.
So why don't we get that, Kevin?
Because Christianity was hijacked by wealthy institutions and the rich, and it's been their servant for centuries, when it really belongs in the hands of the poor.
Now on, all generations will declare me blessed.
God has brought down the mighty from the throne and has lifted up the poor. God sent away the wealthy and has filled the hungry with good things. It's like what you get in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor and woe to the rich. He says that. And it's kind of like this big reversal. Suddenly all the things that the powerful, the government, the corporations, the churches, they all think everything's on our side. We've got the world wrapped up. We can go carpet bomb Iraq whenever we want. You know, we can destroy anybody we want. Suddenly, it's all reversed, and those things are their downfall. And the ones who they're bombing, suddenly you realize, like Martin Luther King learned and Gandhi learned, those are the ones with the power to change history. Not